This is the India development debate right here on ET Now. I'm Supriya, Shrinate, and let's go straight across to the big story that's brewing in the world of trade, because global trade war seems to be all real all of a sudden. Within days after the Trump administration imposing tariffs on a host of Chinese products, including metals and farm products, Beijing hit back today, putting across the curbs on 106 American products. China's trade curbs are targeted at a varied group of products ranging from soybean to automobiles. Back of the envelope calculations show the new levies will affect US exports to China worth around $50 billion a year. Not just that, China has announced that it intends to impose reciprocal duties on American-made aircraft. And financial markets across the world are of course feeling the jitters of this. US markets have taken a heavy beating, even as the aftershocks were felt in Asia and also in Europe. Back home, the Wall Street gave up early gains to end the day at the lowest point. To the end of trade, Sensex was down 350 points. Experts say the escalating trade tension between the two largest economies in the world is surely bad news for global economy, which had just about started to show signs of recovery. The trade war between US and China and what it means for the world at large is a big topic of discussion and debate right here on the India development debate. This evening, I've got a very stellar panel joining me for this discussion. Rajat Nag, Distinguished Fellow, NCAR, R. Jagannathan, Editorial Director, Swarajya Magazine, Jayant Dasgupta, former Ambassador and former Permanent Representative of India to the WTO, and Nilesh Shah, MD, Kotak AMC. So thanks each one of you for being with us. The world looks like a different place this evening, and Dr. Nag, I'm going to begin with you. We've had these discussions before and we've said, let's wait it out. This may be mere rhetoric. Yes, the US has acted, maybe China will not. But all of a sudden, with the Chinese retaliation, have trade war fears returned in full force? Because China has not just acted, it has decided and promised to take on the United States.
Well, it was only to be expected that China will react and react robustly. But there is still a 60 days window of what I would hope would better sense prevails, and we'll have to see if it works out. But I'm much more concerned today than I was a few days back, because I think we are hurtling down a very slippery path. We are still not at a trade war, but certainly it looks like we are headed for one, and it will be a very serious impact. It will have serious ramifications for the global economy at large if it spills beyond just China and the US.
Oh, absolutely. And what if it spills? And Jaggi, I'm just going to come to you on exactly this point. Are we entering a new era of a Cold War 2.0, and only this time it is more trade related? I will discuss the 60-day window and how that perhaps could end this brinkmanship. But just to talk about the world this evening, this seems to be Cold War 2.0, and at the center of this entire controversy is global trade and global economy.
Yeah, I think we should be more worried now than we would have been probably 6 months ago, when we thought it was just a lot of hot air. But now that Trump has acted and China has reacted, we have to worry about it for several reasons. This is not, of course, the first time we are seeing the threat of a trade war, because if you remember in the 1980s, when Japanese automobile exports to the US were soaring, I think the US managed to get Japan to back down and create voluntary curbs on exports. So it's possible that in the next 60-day window, there might be some back channel talks where China voluntarily restrains some of its exports or whatever it does to call off the thing. But one doesn't know, because Trump is not the same kind of president that the kind we had in the Reagan years and later. So I think he delivers a threat and then tries to negotiate a good deal on something like that. So we have to worry about the prospect of this spilling over to wider areas, because China is not a country that wants to be seen as backing down. So unlike the Japan of the 80s, China is more belligerent, and it thinks it has its place in the world. It thinks it's the rising superpower, probably the next superpower, and it is already there. So I think we need to worry. And also one more thing, that if the trade war does take off, it has much greater impact for us, because the goods that you cannot sell to each other will land up in third markets, which means there also cries of protectionism might rise. So even India might find some diversion of some of the things that don't get sold between the two giants, and might come to third markets, which will start getting roiled. So I think we have a lot to worry about. and it's not just because we are protected, but many other things will impact us.
No, absolutely. And I will talk about the India impact in just a bit. And I also want to talk about whether this is tougher negotiations from here on. Mr. Dasgupta, before I come to you, I will go across to Nilesh Shah of Kotak AMC. And Nilesh, you know, look at the kind of reactions that world markets have shown. Look at the kind of reactions we've seen here in India. What a sharp fall for our own markets. Obviously, the reason is that markets fear the risk of a full-blown trade war, and which is why we've seen global carnage across equity markets. Do you believe that is what is plaguing fear, and is there any ebbing this fear as early as tomorrow morning?
Definitely, with the retaliatory tactic by China, the war has been escalated, and President Trump immediately retweeted saying that the war was already lost by previous people. It's now about $500 billion trade deficit and $300 billion intellectual property rights. So clearly this is escalating further, and from our point of view, we just need to secure ourselves. We have IT exports to US, we have pharma exports to US, we run trade surplus with them. If we can shift some of our crude imports to US, that will help in reducing the deficit. And we also need to bring to the attention of US that unlike Uber, which was doing business in China and was forced to merge with Didi, the local company, in India we have given free access to Uber. They can do their business. The freedom of doing business in India, which has been given to American companies, that needs to be highlighted to protect us against the tariff war.
Okay, Mr. Dasgupta, since you have been in the thick of these negotiations at WTO, I'm going to quote what the Chinese government said, and it said it is only polite to reciprocate. China has reciprocated, it really is a tit for tat, but none of the sides have said when is it going to be in effect from. Are we really staring at a full-blown trade war, or are we actually looking at something that Dr. Nag alluded to? This could be brinkmanship just for tougher negotiations. Mr. Dasgupta.
If you look at President Trump's actions in the past, you know, he threatened that he would impose tariffs on everybody on steel and aluminium. Then he backtracked and took out Canada, Mexico, the European Union, South Korea, etc. He made South Korea accept voluntary restraints to the tune of 70% of their exports of steel to the US. He extracted a concession of more cars to be imported into South Korea. So if you look at the past history, I think we are still some distance away from a full-blown trade war. It is a stage of muscle flexing now. The small arms are being brandished, they are being shown to the other side, but no shots have been fired really. But there is a danger that the shots can start getting fired, and then of course the big guns will come in. So there is every possibility of escalation, but I think there is also a great chance that there would be a negotiated settlement. Of course, we can't expect to have full closure by the middle of May when the 2-month period runs out. But I think the gesture of the Chinese to show their cards in a preliminary way that they can impose tariffs on 106 items, which will affect the agricultural sector and many of the other sectors which have been solid in their support to President Trump in his election. So all these lobbies will now sit up and take note, and they will start getting their act together and lobbying and putting pressure on President Trump as well. So I think there is much to be said of the Chinese gesture in showing and revealing their hand at what they are intending to do should the US go ahead and impose tariffs on approximately $50 to $60 billion of imports. So there is a chance that there would be a lot of brinkmanship and statements made by the two sides, but it will de-escalate, I feel.
Okay. it should de-escalate for the good of the world economy, for the good of global trade. But Jaggi, coming on that, how hopeful are you that there will be a window to negotiate and there could be de-escalation? Because going by what President Trump has said, it is likely that the US will go for another set of tariffs unless China addresses the concerns of trade imbalances and intellectual property theft. In case US goes forward with another set of tariffs, China will reciprocate, and this is perhaps going to lead to a breakdown. So, I'm really talking about two extremes. One, a window of negotiation perhaps available and something that leaders of both countries have in mind, and another is absolute breakdown with the possibility I'm talking about. Which of the two sides would you want to talk about at this stage?
No, I think I think Trump's background is that of somebody who goes for a deal by taking extreme positions and then seeing which is the best deal possible. So I don't think he will push it to a point where we get into a full-blown trade war. And if you see, China's response also is like a chess move. I mean, as Mr. Dasgupta said, they have proposed tariffs in areas where Trump's constituency might start worrying him. That look, what do we do if agriculture starts, soybean and other areas start the thing? You'll have Boeing and others worried about it. So I think China is playing its cards and moving its cards quite sensibly in a way in order to get him to back off, and so there will be some back channel talks. So we have to see how this proceeds, because if it becomes an ego battle, then we are in deep trouble. But I think the kind of negotiator Trump is in his past, I would suggest that he likes to do this in order to make that. I think so far he has delivered on most of his threats. I mean, like he said, he'll cut taxes, he's managed to get something done. The wall also probably will proceed at some point. He managed to get us to do things on Harley Davidson and still said that, okay, it's not good enough. So I think he likes to do a lot of talk so that you push the guy into a corner and get the best possible concession and then back off slowly. I mean, I think that's the way he seems to negotiate. And I would still say there is a 40% chance that we won't get into a full-blown trade war. So when he makes his moves, he will calibrate it better.
Fair point indeed, but let's just talk about the action that Beijing has taken. And Dr. Nag, I want to specifically speak to you on this. Beijing's list of 25% additional tariffs on US goods covers 106 items of trade value, matching about $50 billion targeted on the US list. Unlike Washington's list, which many believe had obscure industrial items, China's list strikes at signature US exports: soybean, frozen beef, cars, whiskey, cotton, other key agricultural commodities. And like Mr. Dasgupta was pointing out there, it's emanating from constituencies that are supporters of Trump, the lobbies that will come into work. Will you agree with me that by striking the US where it hurts, China has actually taken the war beyond symbolism? Just to talk about the items that they are targeting.
And obviously, those were very conscious decisions to hurt Mr. Trump where it hurts.
Yes.
And it's not only the issue, as Ambassador Dasgupta mentioned, about building the constituency within the US, which he has not. So I expect the business lobby, the farm lobby, all to actually protest and protest quite loudly against this trade war. But also, Mr. Trump has not built any international coalition of the Europeans or the Canadians or others, because there are some genuine issues that the world can raise with China regarding, let's say, intellectual property rights. But the way Mr. Trump has gone about it is certainly not the way which will lead to any adjustments or concessions by the Chinese. So I'm afraid that the way this has been initiated, and even though there may be good reasons for some of the complaints that the world at large and US in particular has with China, this is not going to lead to a very satisfactory conclusion. The other point I think which is very important, not just the tariffs and tit for tat, but I think the dilution of the global trading arrangements, principally the WTO, is of concern. Now, we know WTO is not perfect, but it is still the only global arrangement we have. And the Trump administration has systematically tried to dilute the WTO. For example, they have not allowed vacancies to be filled in the Dispute Resolution Board and the Dispute Settlement Board. And if you don't have enough members, they have to have, I think they're just one short now of reaching a situation when they can't make any decision. Mr. Trump has also asked for reciprocity, which is fundamentally against the principle of WTO, in which developed countries can give developing countries some favorable treatment. So my concern is not just with the US-China trade war, if it happens, but in essentially damaging the global trading system, which has benefited everybody. Globalization has benefited all countries over the last few decades, including, and particularly I would say, US and China, of course.
No, absolutely. And I think I'm going to digress a little bit and just go away from the US-China trade war to really talk about WTO. And before I go across to someone who's been at WTO, Nilesh Shah, quick question to you. Is this the time when effectiveness of the WTO itself is going to be tested, especially with the two biggest trading blocs being at loggerheads?
Suppose if we take the extreme example like NAFTA, like that Pacific Atlantic treaty, WTO kind of crashes, then we'll have to think about whether free trade agreements with respective blocs will benefit India or not. Our track record in creating FTAs have not been that satisfactory. It has created a win-win situation for both domestic and global players, rather than creating win situation for us and less win situation for global players. So in the unlikely scenario of WTO coming to a standstill, free trade agreements with blocks of countries which will create little bit level playing field in our side will be the way to go. But my guess is that the WTO is here to stay. A lot of effort has gone there to make it work, and it has benefited every country. It's a win-win situation with globalization. These trade skirmishes are more technical maneuvers rather than strategic maneuver. I don't think so in today's globalized world any country will have opportunity to go back on the time.
Okay, I'm going to ask the man who's been at the WTO to give us a sense of how the situation really is there. And Mr. Dasgupta, apart from the China versus the US trade, like Dr. Nag said, what's really happening is that the rules of global trade are being distorted. And one such rule is how the WTO is being consistently weakened. Its effectiveness being constantly tested. The US wants reciprocity. Members are not being nominated. The role of the WTO is really under question. And what sort of a role will it play as these trade wars escalate, and we are sitting at the risk of that happening? Mr. Dasgupta?
There are several important issues that you have raised. The first thing is that there are three aspects of the WTO. One is new rule making. The second is to review whether the different member countries are adhering to the rules and to step in through dispute settlement. And the third, of course, is the jewel in the crown, which is the dispute settlement system. So as far as rule making is concerned, apart from the trade facilitation agreement which was signed 2-3 years ago, there hasn't been any new rule making in the WTO. So that function of the WTO has become moribund. The second aspect of reviewing and putting peer pressure and making countries adhere to the WTO rules by consensus, that also seems to be on the decline. As far as the third and most important aspect, which is still alive, is concerned, that is the dispute settlement system. By the 1st of October, there will be only 4 members of the appellate body in office. So, the appellate body also would be deluged with appeals which it normally has to dispose of within 90 days of their getting filed. What I am trying to hit home is that because of the US attitude of not agreeing to have new members take office in the appellate body, the dispute settlement system also is under a very, very severe threat. So, the WTO's functioning, which has already been jeopardized a lot, and I wouldn't be too wrong in saying that this came about primarily from 2009 onwards, from the previous US administration, when the US administration said that whatever had been agreed between 2001 and 2008 in the Doha round was off the table, and we had to negotiate all over again. And now, of course, since President Trump has taken over, he's taken an even harder line. So, the effectiveness of the WTO is can only be there if all the member states abide by the rules, and they do it in a gentlemanly way. Since that is in question now, the WTO, I think, has been taken out of the equation in some way, and multilateralism in trade at least is under very, very serious threat. So, in the case of this trade war, I do not think the WTO will be able to do much. It will be the countries which are members and which are important trading entities, the European Union, Japan, Brazil, Mexico, India, Canada, Australia. These will have to step in, and they will have to use their good offices to de-escalate the whole thing, to put give good counsel to both the sides, and to allow face saving on both on both sides, so as to come to some kind of a negotiated settlement. Of course, we can't expect to have full closure by the end of May. It will linger on, it will fester.
Right. Absolutely. But very quickly, Jaggi, if I may come to you, what we have seen China do today in response to what the US did, what sort of a repercussion do you believe this is going to have on supply chains? What will this mean for cost as far as consumers are concerned, and to manufacturers in particular?
Yeah, I mean, what we have seen over the last 30 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall is the creation of global supply chains which are very intricately connected with one another, which means the disruption in one country can actually disrupt the whole chain. And if tariff wars escalate and you see disruptions in supply chains, then you are certainly going to see a huge impact on manufacturing. India, of course, is not a huge part of this global supply chains, especially in manufacturing. So, we actually will not be that impacted, but all the supply chains that run across the world, from the US to China and Southeast Asia and Europe, and I think those are definitely going to be impacted. But I think we have to see that, I mean, I agree with Mr. Dasgupta. I think we are seeing two parallel developments. One, there is a trend towards deglobalization, where I think bilateral deals or deals between blocks of economic partners are going to be more important than multilateral forums like WTO or the thing. You have seen that even in the security architecture. We have seen China create its own development bank with the BRICS bank, which will at some point, maybe 15-20 years, will start having as big a corpus as, say, a World Bank or a IMF. I mean, so that we are moving in that direction where blocks are thing. China with its $1 trillion Belt and Road initiative will create a huge economic bloc, assuming it takes off. So we are seeing a period of deglobalization and regionalization of trade blocks and trade power. I think WTO will come down in importance in the short run, though it will come back once the negative aspects surface after 3 to 5 years and people are tired of it, it will come back. But we are going to see some retreat from global multilateral institutions, and that seems to be a given.
All right, just before I move to the India focus, I must ask you, Professor Dr. Nag there, and this has to be on, products such as cell phones made by Apple, laptops made by Dell were all excluded, and that leaves me with the question, how did the tech companies dodge a bullet from China? I mean, why were they left untouched?
I think the point is that you cannot dodge that bullet because you're so intricate, as both Dr. Dasgupta and Mr. Jagannathan mentioned. The world is now globalized and it's going to be very difficult to just pull back. And having benefited from globalization, we've got to recognize that even though there is obviously now nationalistic pressures at various parts of the world, for good reason, we will not be able to move away from it. I think the problem has been that the benefits of globalization have not been equitably distributed, and there has been an asymmetry. And I think what you're seeing is that people who have actually benefited less or actually even lost are basically speaking up, and that is why the nationalistic fears and biases are coming to the fore. So to answer your question, Supriya, I don't think these tech companies will be able to dodge the bullet. They will be hit, but I'm hoping that will be relatively short runs because the benefits are much greater than the costs. But those incidents of costs and benefits have to be more equitably shared, and I'm hoping that good sense will prevail, and that is where we will end up, even though there will be obvious roadblocks on the way.
Right. Just before I go to Nilesha, Mr. Dasgupta, I have to ask you this question. Can India escape unscathed as Trump looks to rectify trade imbalances? I mean, the US president had indirectly named India in his March 2nd tweet. He referred to Harley Davidson. Can we really escape what the world is going through? Mr. Dasgupta?
I think if you look at the trade imbalance or trade balance in favor of India, it's just about $21–22 billion in merchandise trade. And that is because of the kind of things which we export to the US and the US in turn exports to India. But we are going to buy a lot more of oil and gas from the US to from this year onwards, and there are other avenues which we can use to reduce the trade deficit. But having said that, in a globalized world, each country, if it tries to have a positive trade balance against all other countries, it is just impossible. There would be countries which would be huge consumers, which would require things, goods and services to drive their own economies, like the US, and they would be running a net trade deficit against the rest of the world. So this is the way globalization works, and the kind of demands that are being made, especially in relation to Harley Davidson, on each tariff line, if you expect countries to have reciprocity with you, that is just not possible, and that is not the way global trade rules have been framed either. And as Dr. Nag pointed out some time ago, developing countries which are on the path to industrialize, they need a certain degree of protection, a certain treatment from the rest of the world, and this is the kind of thing which we are seeing raising its head in the anti-globalization drive. It is about not only about the 1% getting much richer in comparison to the 99% in the same country, but amongst countries, and that is what needs to be addressed. So reciprocity in this way, of course, is not something which we can accept.
Fair point indeed, but I'll have to take a quick round of last questions with all of you. Request each one of you to be brief so that we can cover a lot of ground. But Nilesha, coming to you, can India at this stage use a large domestic market as an effective tool to negotiate on better trade terms? Nilesha?
Undoubtedly, we should use it. We must highlight to the America that, look, all your companies like Google, WhatsApp, Amazon, Netflix, Uber, we have given free access to them, unlike China, which hasn't given free access to them. For Uber, there is Didi. For Amazon, there is Alibaba. For Google, there is Baidu. For other companies, there is Tencent. I mean, certainly we have opened our market for foreign capital, for foreign investment, and there are umpteen examples of successful investment over a period of time, from Procter & Gamble to Hindustan Lever to Nestle to Maruti Suzuki. We have created win-win situation for global investment and local market, and we will by default become the most preferred choice because there is such a large domestic market. We definitely should leverage it for our benefit.
All right, Dr. Nag, I want to quickly take, in the last one, I will take this question with you. What do you expect others to do, whether it's the European Union, whether it's South Korea, Japan? What sort of action do you expect others to follow? Are they all going to join in this, two trading factions and the war that they are at?
I would certainly hope not. And the other thing I would hope very much, that countries individually don't go cap in hand to the US asking for exemption. I think we should recognize that at the moment the issue is China, US, and that's bad enough. If the rest of the world joins in what I would think is madness, it would only mean that there'll be a global race to the bottom. So I hope very much that good sense will prevail, including in India. And India, I think, should wait and watch and see if actually diversion is taking place. And if it is, then again, WTO is the right place to go and settle those issues, that countries which are being affected by this trade war, say China, is dumping into India. So to answer your question, Supriya, I would hope very much that the rest of the world would not participate in this tit-for-tat trade war, which nobody can win, and actually everybody will lose.
All right, Mr. Dasgupta, wait and watch for India, do you think? And do you also believe at some stage India had this great desire to be an export-oriented growth economy? Has that perhaps been nipped in the bud, if I may? A very harsh word I'm using, but yeah, I'm asking you that question.
I think if you look at the way manufacturing, the manufacturing sector has developed all over the world, the Chinese experiment or the kind of example that China has set in manufacturing-led export growth, that is not going to get replicated. So we have to make incremental progress, and we have to leverage the areas where we have expertise, where we can develop expertise, for instance, knowledge-based industries, high technology areas where we have huge research workforce which can be put to good use. So those are the kind of things which we need to look at, and we need to put in an enormous effort in research and development. We have to spend in research and development along with our infrastructure to make our exports globally competitive.
Right.
And one of the things which President Trump has mentioned, and other commentators have also mentioned, is about China's Make in China policy 2025. Part of this war is because of that,
right,
to prevent China from occupying the heights of excellence,
right,
in a few chosen areas.
Right. Fair point. Okay, Jaggi, to you last then, and this has to be beyond rhetoric. Is this really a clash of egos, not between the US and China, but is this a personality clash between Xi Jinping, the ultimate leader in China, and Donald Trump?
No, I don't think so. I think Trump has taken on the whole world. I mean, it's not like he has a beef only with China. I mean, he's taken on everybody from North Korea to the European Union, and even managed to abuse Japan on not doing enough on some areas like defense, and that they are protecting them and all that. So this is the isolationist streak in America, which surfaces once in 20, 30 years. That's coming through Trump's voice this time, and that he's a maverick as this thing. So it's not just a ego thing. I think for a few years, I think we will see a slide back towards some deglobalization, but good sense will prevail. But we have to go through the process, hit the troughs first before we start rising again. So, but I think India would play its card best if we do good bilateral deals with people like Trump. I think we can easily get some deals out of him. Probably do good deals with China, with Russia and EU. We need to talk to them separately. Multilateralism is not going to work in the short run because Trump is not going to play ball there.
Fair point. Right. Okay, on that note, thank you very, very much, R. Jagannathan, Mr. Jayant Das Gupta, Dr. Rajat Nag and Mr. Nilesh Shah. Thanks very much for being with us. This really has been a fascinating debate because I think global trade wars have moved beyond the rhetoric. But like Wilbur Ross said, this is a zero-sum game, and like the Chinese finance minister says, it's a lose-lose situation, and I hope the world realizes and wakes up to the reality of no globalization. Each one of us has benefited from that, and we must keep that intact at all costs. Thanks very much for being with us in this edition of the India Development Debate. A quick breather, and we come back with Yashwant Sinha, India's former finance minister, on the ICICI Bank controversy and the state of India's largest lenders.